Have you ever bought an antique and wondered if it carries secrets from the past? Today, I will tell you a mysterious story about an old mirror. A story that you definitely cannot miss. Prepare yourself, because you will embark on an unexpected journey of mystery. The Old Mirror. Emma and Jack, a young couple passionate about decorating their new home, accidentally discovered an antique mirror in a second-hand shop hidden in a small street. The shop had a strangely gloomy atmosphere, with dim lighting and time-worn items. The mirror immediately caught Emma's eye. It had an intricately carved oak frame, looking like it had been through a century, giving it a nostalgic beauty but exuding an indescribable mystery. Jack was not sure, but when he saw the joy in his wife's eyes, he could not refuse. "We'll put it in the bedroom, next to the window," Emma said excitedly. And so, the antique mirror became a part of their cozy little home. From the very first night, Emma noticed something was wrong. As she walked past the mirror to get her scarf, she caught a glimpse of a strange figure passing by in the mirror. She turned around, startled, but there was no one but Jack lying on the bed, looking at his phone. "It must be my imagination," she assured herself. But the imagination didn't stop there. Every night, when the soft light of the nightlight illuminated the room, the mirror seemed to reflect something unusual. Strange figures, fleeting but so clear that they could not be denied. Jack didn't believe it at first. "You must be working too hard, Emma," he assured her. But then, he began to sense something strange too. One night, as Jack was adjusting his collar in the mirror, he saw a figure standing right behind him. He turned around immediately, but there was no one there. His eyes met Emma's in confusion. "You saw it too?" Emma whispered. Jack just nodded. The feeling of anxiety made the two decide to investigate the mirror's origin. They returned to the antique shop, but it was closed. A nearby neighbor said that the shop had closed down many years ago, and no one knew where the owner had gone. That information made them shiver even more. Not giving up, Emma and Jack started searching online. They discovered an old post on an antique forum, talking about a mirror with a matching description. According to the post, the mirror had belonged to a noble family in the 19th century, but every member of that family met a tragic end. The post also revealed that the mirror was more than just an ordinary object. It was rumored to have the ability to reflect the future of those who looked into it. But it wasn't a gift, it was a curse. The images in the mirror always carried a dark message. One night, when Emma was alone in her room, she decided to face her fear. She stood in front of the mirror, staring straight into it. At first, she saw only her familiar reflection. But then, slowly, the image began to change. She saw another version of herself, with white hair and a wrinkled face. Next to her was Jack, also old and frail. But what terrified her most was their empty, desperate eyes. She screamed, causing Jack to rush into the room. "I just saw us," But in the future, she said, her voice trembling. Jack decided to try it too. And he saw the same thing. They saw themselves, not in the present, but in some future moment. The image haunted them, like a mysterious warning. Unable to bear it any longer, Jack and Emma decided to destroy the mirror. But strangely, no matter how hard they tried to smash it, the mirror remained unmoved. It was as if it was protected by an invisible force. Finally, they decided to take the mirror to an ancient temple, where there was an old monk famous for dispelling mysteries. The monk looked at the mirror, his eyes filled with thought. This mirror is not something you should keep. It is a bridge between time and space, and it carries the curses of the past, he said. The monk performed a long ritual, and finally the mirror was sealed in a deep underground vault, where light never reached. After that event, Emma and Jack returned to their normal lives, but the images in the mirror still haunted them. They never forgot the empty eyes of their future selves. The mirror is gone, but the question remains, was what they saw really the future, or was it just an illusion from a cursed object? The answer, perhaps, will forever remain a mystery. So, what do you think of this story? If you ever came across an antique, would you dare to take it home? Don't forget to share your thoughts.
Story 2. The Door That Won't Close. Have you ever felt like someone was watching you in the dark? There was a creepy feeling in the back of your head, but when you turned around, there was no one there? Welcome to the story of Emily, a young girl living in a peaceful suburb, but her life was changed forever by a door that wouldn't close. Emily, a 19-year-old girl, lives with her mother in a cozy little house. After her father died in a car accident 2 years ago, she and her mother only had each other to rely on. Emily has a habit. Before going to bed, she always reminds her mother to close her door tightly. Not just lock the door, but completely close the door. "Mom, remember to close the door carefully," Emily said every night before entering the room. Her mother, Susan, often smiled and replied, "Okay, daughter. Go to sleep peacefully." But strange things started to happen. Every night, Emily woke up around 3 a.m. Her bedroom door, which was supposed to be closed, was wide open. At first, she thought maybe her mother had forgotten. But this happened so often that Emily began to feel uneasy. One night, Emily decided to check for herself. Before going to bed, she checked the door very carefully, making sure it was securely locked. But that night, she was awakened by a strange sound. It was a creaking sound, as if someone was opening the door. Emily sat up, staring into the darkness. Her bedroom door slowly opened, but no one was there. She shakily walked out, looking around the hallway. Everything was quiet. Nothing unusual. "I must have imagined it," she told herself, trying to reassure herself. But when she got back to bed, she felt as if someone was watching her. In the days that followed, the picture got worse. Emily began to hear strange noises in the night. Slow footsteps on the wooden floor, indistinct whispers. She told her mother, but Susan just laughed. "You watch too many horror movies, Emily. It's nothing." But then, one fateful night happened. Emily woke up to a cold feeling spreading through her body. When she opened her eyes, she saw a dark figure standing in the doorway of her room. It was a man, wearing old clothes, a pale face, and a creepy, twisted smile. "Who are you?" Emily stammered. But the man didn't answer. He just stood there, staring at her, then suddenly disappeared as if he had never existed. Emily screamed. Susan ran in, but by the time she got there, everything was back to normal. "There's no one here, Emily. You're dreaming," she said, but Emily knew she wasn't dreaming. Emily decided to investigate the house. She rummaged through old family papers and discovered a chilling truth. The house had once belonged to a man named Robert Allen, a loner with a history of violence. Robert had mysteriously disappeared 20 years ago, and no one knew where he had gone. Emily told her mother, but Susan still didn't believe her. "You're thinking too much, Emily. We shouldn't make a big deal out of it." But Emily couldn't ignore what she had seen. She decided to put a small camera in her room to record what happened at night. That night, Emily woke up again at 3 a.m. The door was wide open. She felt him, the strange shadow of a man. But this time, she didn't scream. She just lay there, pretending to sleep, letting the camera record everything. The next morning, when she reviewed the video, she couldn't believe her eyes. Her door opened automatically without anyone touching it. Then a shadow appeared, slowly becoming clear. It was the man she had seen. He stood still, looked at her for a moment, then disappeared. Emily took the video to the police. But after watching it, they only said that the video could be edited. No one believed her. Emily decided to protect herself. One night, she took a small knife with her, waiting for the shadow to appear. When the door to her room opened, he was there again, with a creepy smile on his face. "What do you want from me?" Emily shouted. The man did not answer, just walked into the room, approaching her bed. In that moment, Emily rushed forward, but when she touched him, all that was left was air. He disappeared. After that night, Emily and her mother decided to leave the house. Even though she had moved away, Emily often dreamed that the door to her room slowly opened, and the shadow of the man stood there, smiling at her. There are mysteries in this world that we can never explain. But if you have a door that never closes, be careful, because you never know who or what is on the other side of the door. Story 3. The Shadow Under the Bed. Have you ever felt unsafe in your own room? The place that is supposed to be the safest, but sometimes becomes the scariest place? Come join me in the story of a boy named Alex, where all the hauntings begin from under the bed. Alex, a 12-year-old boy, lives in an old house in the suburbs. His room is small but cozy, with a large bed in the middle of the room and a wardrobe in the corner. Alex always feels comfortable in his space, until he starts to hear whispers. At first, he thinks it's just his imagination. The whispers sound very soft, like someone is trying to call his name from afar. Alex shakes his head, telling himself that he must have heard wrong. But every night, when everything is quiet, the whispers sound again, this time clearer, and it seems it's coming from under the bed. Alex! Alex! A chill runs down his spine. Trying to ignore it, Alex pulls the covers over his head, but the creepy feeling doesn't go away. The following nights, things get weirder. Alex feels like someone is watching him. Every time he enters his room, he feels like something is moving very quickly under the bed. But every time he bent down to check, there was nothing but a dark void. One night, Alex decided to tell his mother, Jessica. But when she heard her son's story, she just smiled softly. "You're growing up. Your imagination is developing. There's nothing under the bed." But Alex knew he wasn't imagining it. One night, Alex woke up from a dream. He felt the cold air in the room. And then, he heard a familiar whisper, this time closer than ever. "Alex! Who's in my bed?" He panicked. The voice didn't sound like an adult's. but it didn't sound like a child's either. Alex gathered up his courage, bent down to look, and then he saw himself. That's right. Under the bed was a boy who looked exactly like him, with a pale face and empty eyes. "Who's in my bed?" Alex whispered under the bed, his eyes boring into him. Alex screamed and backed away. But when his mother ran into the room, everything was gone. "What did you say?" "There's no one here." His mother looked around, but saw nothing. Alex could only gasp, unable to speak. In the following days, Alex avoided his room. But then he began to hear whispering, not just in the bedroom, but all over the house, in the living room, the kitchen, even the bathroom. He decided to investigate. One morning, when his mother went out, Alex sneaked into the bedroom, holding a flashlight. He shined the light under the bed, hoping to find an answer. Beneath it, he saw an old, dusty notebook. Opening it, Alex saw scribbled words, as if someone had written them in a panic. "Don't lie on the bed. Someone is watching. Under the bed is the safest place. Don't believe what you see." Alex felt cold all over. He realized this room had belonged to another child, and that child had gone through the same thing. But where was that child? Alex didn't know what to do. He tried to tell his mother, but she didn't believe him. One night, Alex decided to face his fear. He left the light on and sat upright in bed, waiting for something to happen. And then, at 2 a.m., he felt it. The bed shook slightly, as if something was moving underneath. "Alex, who's in my bed?" The whispering rang out again. He couldn't take it anymore. Alex bent down and shouted, "Who are you? What do you want from me?" He saw Alex under the bed. But this time, it wasn't standing still. It crawled out, little by little. "This is my bed. You're a stranger. Get out." Alex ran out of the room, his heart pounding. But when he returned to his mother, everything was back to normal. There was nothing under the bed. But Alex knew it was still there, waiting for a chance to come back. Alex and his mother eventually moved out of the house. But he never forgot the eyes of the replica under the bed. Sometimes, at night, Alex still heard a whisper in his dreams. "Alex, who is in my bed?" If you are reading this story, ask yourself, is it really empty under your bed? Story 4. The Mysterious Music Box. Have you ever received a seemingly ordinary gift that actually contained terrifying mysteries? This is the story of Olivia, a young girl who receives an antique music box from her grandmother. But the box is more than just a gift. It is the key to unlocking a nightmare. Olivia, 23, is a city girl whose childhood was tied to the small village where her grandmother lived. Her grandmother Margaret was always the person Olivia loved the most, especially when she used to tell her fairy tales and the melodies of her beloved music box. One day, Margaret passed away. Olivia was extremely sad. During the reading of her grandmother's will, she received a gift from her grandmother, an antique music box made of ebony, carved with delicate patterns. The box had a small gold lock, but strangely, there was no key. "Grandma always said this box was very special," Olivia whispered, looking at it. Little did she know, the box would change her life forever. The first night after bringing the music box home, Olivia placed it on the bookshelf near her bed. It was a quiet night, nothing unusual, until about 3 a.m. A melody rang out. It traveled positive, ringing, but also eerie. Olivia jumped up, her heart pounding. The light from the box flickered in the darkness. She moved closer and opened the lid. Inside was a small mirror, but there was no musical mechanism. No spring, no gears, completely empty. How can it play music? Olivia wondered. a sense of unease beginning to creep in. Over the next few days, Olivia noticed that the music only played at night, always at 3 a.m. This time, she decided to record the video to see what was really going on. The next morning, Olivia watched the video again, horrified. The box opened by itself, and the silhouette of a woman was visible in the small mirror inside. The woman had a blank look in her eyes, and her lips moved rhythmically, as if singing along with the music. "This can't be real," Olivia muttered, her hands shaking. But she knew it couldn't be a coincidence. Olivia decided to investigate the box's origins. She dug into Margaret's old letters and discovered something strange. Her grandmother had mentioned a woman named Eleanor, a close friend from her youth. The final letter was haunting. Eleanor always loved that music box. She said it played like a lullaby. But when she started hearing whispers in the night, I knew something was wrong. Olivia, if you read this, remember, don't leave the box open for too long. And never let it play more than 3 times in one night. Olivia was bewildered. She realized that the box was more than a gift, it was a curse. Part 5. Whispers in the Night. The next night, Olivia decided to test it. She placed the box on the table and sat watching. At exactly 3 a.m., the melody played again, this time clearer, and whispers began to emerge. "Olivia, open the box. We're waiting." She couldn't bear it. Olivia grabbed a hammer, intending to break the box, but when she raised the hammer, the box slammed shut, as if to protect itself. She screamed and threw the box into the corner of the room. But the melody continued, and the silhouette of the woman in the mirror became clearer and clearer. Olivia sought help from an antiques expert, Mr. Thomas. When he saw the box, he paled. This box belonged to Eleanor Green, a woman who disappeared 50 years ago. Legend has it that this music box doesn't play music. It's a portal to another world. Those who own it are haunted by Eleanor's spirit. Olivia didn't believe it. "So what do I have to do to get rid of it?" "Don't let it play music again. And if you can, return it to where it belongs." On the last night, Olivia decided to put the music box in a large wooden box, lock it, and take it to the riverbank. But before she could do so, the melody played again. This time, it was so loud that it seemed to tear the air apart. The woman in the mirror stepped out, tall and her eyes shining. "Thank you for keeping the box for me. But now I want more." Olivia screamed, but it was too late. Everything was dark. The next morning, the music box was found by the riverbank, but Olivia was nowhere to be seen. A curious villager opened the box, and the melody played again. Do you dare to keep an antique music box? If you do, remember, never let it play without a mechanism inside, because you never know who or what is waiting for you inside. Story 5. The Midnight Call. Ethan, 27, lives alone in a small apartment on the outskirts of the city. His job as a programmer requires him to stay up late often to complete projects. Ethan's life is quite simple: work, eat, play games, and sleep. His apartment is on the ground floor, with a main door facing a deserted street. He always feels comfortable and safe in this space, until one fateful night. That night, Ethan was sitting on the sofa, eyes glued to the computer screen, finishing up a project. When the clock pointed to 3 a.m., his phone vibrated. An unknown number appeared on the screen. Ethan frowned. Who would be calling him at this hour? "Hello." Ethan picked up the phone, his voice tinged with annoyance. There was no answer. But after a few seconds, a whisper came through. "I'm at your door." Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. He jumped up and walked to the door. Through the peephole, he saw no one. He sneered, thinking someone was playing a prank. But before he could hang up, The voice came back through. "Open the door, Ethan." He was startled. How did that person know his name? He opened the door, but there was no one outside. The street in front of his house was dark, lit only by the dim light from the street lamps. Ethan felt his hand was cold, and when he looked down, the phone in his hand was cold too. The next morning, Ethan tried to shake off the strange events of the night before. He convinced himself that it was just a joke. But things didn't stop there. In the following days, Ethan began to receive calls in the middle of the night, always at exactly 3 a.m. The voice whispered, sometimes near, sometimes far. "I'm closer. I'm in your house. I'm standing right behind you." Ethan began to feel uneasy. He checked every door, locked all the windows. But every time he answered the phone, a cold feeling crept into his hand, as if someone was holding it. In a panic, Ethan decided to investigate. Ethan called the carrier to ask about the unknown number, but they couldn't find any information. "This isn't a number in our system," the support person replied. Ethan started searching online. He found many similar stories, strange calls in the middle of the night, whispering voices of unknown origin. But no one had an answer. It all ended in mystery. He reached out to a close friend, Liam, to tell him what had happened. Liam, who had always been interested in the supernatural, decided to spend the night at Ethan's apartment to help him figure it out. Liam brought a recorder and a camera to record whatever happened. The two stayed up late, waiting. At exactly 3 a.m., Ethan's phone rang again. "Hello." Ethan picked up, putting the phone on speaker so Liam could hear. The whispering voice rang out, this time clearer than ever. "You two think you can escape?" Ethan and Liam looked at each other, their faces pale. Liam quickly turned on the camera, pointed at the door. But at that moment, the light in the room flickered, and there was a knock on the door. The two approached the door, trembling as they opened it. There was no one outside, but on the floor there was a handprint in the dust, stretching from the door to the inside of the house. Ethan and Liam decided not to run away anymore. They placed the recorder near the door and continued to monitor. The next night, at exactly 3 a.m., the phone rang. But this time, instead of answering, Liam turned on the recorder, trying to record the whisper. When they reviewed the recording the next morning, they were horrified to realize that, besides the whisper, there was another sound. Footsteps, slowly, moving in the room. They looked at each other, knowing that something not of this world was present in the apartment. Ethan decided to leave the apartment, but before he could move, the last call came. The voice whispered, this time cold and clear. "You think you can escape me? I'm not just in the apartment. I'm inside you." A cold feeling enveloped Ethan. He looked into the mirror, and for a moment, the eyes that reflected him were no longer his. Ethan finally left the apartment, but the calls continued. No one knew what had happened to him, only that every time the clock struck 3 a.m., the voice rang out. If you get a call in the middle of the night from an unknown number, remember, don't answer, because you never know what's waiting for you on the other end. Story 6. Room 13 of the hotel. The Blackwood Hotel, located on the outskirts of a small town, is famous for its quaint and luxurious beauty. But alongside the praise, this hotel also has a big mystery. Room number 13. According to rumors, anyone who stays in this room experiences the same strange phenomenon. They dream of a person standing at the foot of the bed, doing nothing but staring at them all night. Whether they try to scream or run away, they are frozen in their dreams, unable to move or open their eyes. The hotel owner, Mrs. Evelyn, always insists that this is just a baseless rumor. There is nothing special about room 13. It is just a normal room like any other room. But is it true? James, 29, is a journalist who specializes in writing about supernatural phenomena. He heard about the story of Room 13 and decided to find out the truth. If anything really happens, I want to be the first to see it, James told his friend before arriving at the hotel. When he arrived at the Blackwood, James was greeted by Mrs. Evelyn, who seemed reluctant to tell him he wanted Room 13. "Are you sure? There are plenty of other rooms that are more comfortable," she said. But James insisted. "That's why I'm here." James entered Room 13, a small but neatly furnished room. Nothing unusual, at least not at first. But as the night wore on, things began to change. James prepared his camera, tape recorder, and other equipment to record any strange phenomena. He went to bed at 11 p.m., feeling perfectly comfortable. But at exactly 2:59 a.m., a cold wind blew through the room, despite all the windows being closed. James woke up suddenly, feeling as if someone was watching him. He opened his eyes and immediately froze. At the foot of the bed, a figure stood. It was a tall man, dressed in classic clothes, his face pale with empty eyes. He said nothing, just stood there, staring at James. James tried to move, but he couldn't. He felt as if he were frozen in time. His heart was pounding, and cold sweat broke out all over his body. When the clock struck 3:33 a.m., the figure suddenly disappeared, and James could breathe again. The next morning, James went to see Mrs. Evelyn to ask about the man he had seen. Mrs. Evelyn shook her head in denial at first, but when James described the details, her face paled. "You're talking about Mr. Thomas Blackwood, the founder of this hotel," she whispered. "But he died more than 80 years ago." James decided to investigate further. He found an old library in town and discovered a horrifying truth. Mr. Thomas Blackwood had mysteriously died in Room 13. According to the documents, he was found sitting at the end of the bed, eyes wide open, as if staring at something that no one could see. Since then, the Blackwood Hotel has become a place of rumors, and Room 13 is considered a place no one wants to stay overnight. Despite his fear, James decided to stay another night to collect evidence. This time, he was more prepared, placing cameras in every corner of the room, even under the bed. He also turned on the continuous recording, hoping to capture any sound. That night, at exactly 3 a.m., footsteps rang out. James opened his eyes and saw Mr. Thomas standing at the end of the bed, just like the night before. But this time, he didn't just stand still. He moved closer, each step making James feel like his heart stopped. James tried to scream, but no sound came out. Mr. Thomas leaned close to James's face and whispered in a cold voice, "Leave here, before it's too late." The clock struck 3:33, and everything fell silent again. James left the hotel the next morning, taking the video and audio recording with him. But when he reviewed it, he discovered something strange. All the equipment was off from 3 to 3:33 in the morning. However, in the recording, there was a whisper that repeated over and over again, "Don't come back." James realized that Room 13 was not simply a place where strange phenomena occurred. It was a place that held Mr. Thomas's soul, or something even worse. Anyone who stayed too long would become a part of the room. James wrote his article, warning anyone who might consider staying in Room 13. But even so, there were still curious people who came to the Blackwood Hotel, wanting to test their courage. If you think you are brave enough to face your fears, try Room 13 of the Blackwood Hotel. But remember, if you see someone standing at the foot of your bed, do not try to look them in the eye, because you may never wake up. Story 7. The Talking Dog. Lily, a 10-year-old girl living with her family in a small, quiet town, has always loved dolls. On her 10th birthday, her mother, Sarah, gave Lily a special doll named Bella. The doll has long blonde hair, blue eyes, and a gentle smile. The most special thing about Bella is that she can talk. Lily's mother explained that Bella is programmed to say simple phrases like, "Hello," "Good night," or "I love you." To Lily, Bella is not just a toy but also her best friend. From the day she received Bella, Lily took the doll everywhere. She told Bella everything, her little secrets, her dreams, and even her secret fears. Everything was normal until one evening. Lily was playing with Bella in her room when the doll suddenly said, "Lily, I like your room." Lily was startled. This was not a phrase programmed into Bella. She was surprised, but quickly thought that maybe her mother had installed a new feature without telling her. But then, Bella's words became more and more strange. One time, when Lily told her about her classmate who bullied her, Bella replied, "You don't have to be afraid. I'll take care of you." Lily laughed, thinking that Bella was just comforting her. But then, the things Bella said began to go beyond her imagination. One night, Lily woke up in the middle of her sleep because she heard whispering. She looked around. Only Bella was lying on the chair, her eyes wide open as if looking at her. Bella suddenly said, "Lily, there's someone in the room." Lily panicked, turned on the light to check, but saw nothing unusual. She hugged Bella, trying to reassure herself that she was just dreaming. But Bella's voice kept echoing in her head all night. From that day on, Bella started saying more and more strange things. One day, when Lily was about to go out to play, Bella whispered, "Don't go. There's danger out there." Lily's creepy feeling grew, but she still couldn't leave Bella. She loved the doll too much to believe that it could harm her. Lily's mother, Sarah, began to notice that her daughter wasn't as cheerful as before. When she asked, Lily hesitantly told her about the strange things Bella said. Sarah immediately felt uneasy. She couldn't remember installing any features that would allow Bella to say such complex sentences. Sarah decided to examine the doll. When she took Bella apart, she realized that the mechanism inside was very simple, only allowing it to say pre-programmed phrases. There was no technology that could allow Bella to learn or say new things. "It must be your imagination, Lily," Sarah said, but there was a vague fear in her. Bella didn't just talk. She started moving on her own. Lily often found Bella in places she didn't put her. One time, when Lily left the room for dinner, she returned and found Bella sitting in the middle of the bed, where she had left her on the bookshelf. She tried to reassure herself, thinking she had misremembered. But then it became undeniable. One night, Lily heard footsteps in her room. When she turned on the light, Bella was sitting next to her bed, pointing straight at the window. Bella said in a cold voice, "Someone's watching you." Lily screamed and ran out of the room. Sarah ran in, but when she got there, Bella was back on the bookshelf. Terrified, Sarah decided to find out where Bella came from. She contacted the store that had sold the doll, but they said Bella was not a common product. "It's a one-off. We got it from an older man," the store clerk explained. Sarah went to the man, Richard. He told her that Bella had belonged to his daughter, Emily, who had died in an accident years ago. "Emily loved Bella more than anything," Richard said. "But ever since she died, I felt like her spirit was still attached to the doll." Sarah was horrified. She realized that Bella was more than just a toy. She was a portal to a spirit from the past. Sarah and Lily decided to get rid of Bella. They took the doll to a dump far from town. But when they returned home, Bella was lying on the dining room table, staring at them. "Lily, I told you. I'll always be with you." Lily burst into tears. Sarah decided to burn Bella, but as the fire burned, the doll let out a scream and turned to ash. Lily thought it was over, but she often heard Bella's voice in her dreams. "I'm always here, Lily. Is your favorite doll really just a toy? If you find it saying things you never taught it, it might be time to ask. Because sometimes, seemingly harmless things contain secrets you never wanted to know." Story 8. Foot Weights on the Roof. Have you ever heard strange noises in the night? The wind whistling through the windows, footsteps that you can't explain? This is the story of the Miller family, a peaceful family living in a small house in the suburbs, until each night their nights begin to echo with footsteps on the roof, dragging them into a nightmare with no way out. The Miller family, including John, Sarah, and their 8-year-old son Lucas, have just moved into an old house in the suburbs. The house is beautiful, cozy, and has a spacious yard, a perfect place to start a new life. John is a civil engineer, often away on business trips. Sarah is a devoted mother, taking care of everything in the family. Lucas, a curious and active boy, quickly falls in love with the garden and the mysterious attic of the house. The first days at the house pass peacefully, but after only a week, the Millers' quiet nights began to be interrupted by a strange sound. The first night, Sarah heard a strange noise. It was a steady thump of footsteps on the roof, as if someone was walking. She woke John, but when they both listened, the noise disappeared. "It must be some stray cat," John assured his wife, and went back to sleep. But Sarah couldn't shake the uneasy feeling. The second night, the footsteps came again, this time more clearly. Sarah decided to climb into the attic to investigate, but found nothing but a thick layer of dust. No trace of any animal. Lucas began to panic. "Mom, I hear it every night. Someone's walking on the roof," he said, his eyes filled with worry. Sarah tried to reassure her son, but inside she began to feel a chill. Part 3. The Creepy Discovery. One night, John decided to investigate for himself. He took a flashlight and climbed up to the roof to investigate. As the light illuminated the dust on the roof, he noticed something strange: footprints. The footprints did not look like animal footprints. They were human footprints. But what was even more frightening was that they led to the edge of the roof and disappeared. There was no sign that the person had climbed down or fallen. John turned back, trying to hide his panic so as not to worry his wife and children. But Sarah realized something was wrong. "What did you see up there?" she asked. John just shook his head. "Nothing. I'll check more carefully in the morning." The footsteps continued to echo every night, getting louder and longer. The Millers no longer slept well. Lucas often woke up crying because he felt like someone was watching him through the window. Sarah began to feel the presence of something unusual. One day, while she was doing laundry in the basement, she heard footsteps on the ceiling right above her. But when she ran upstairs, the house was completely silent. "We have to do something," Sarah told John. But he just shook his head. "It's probably the wind, or the branches rubbing against the roof." "Don't worry about it." But Sarah knew it wasn't the wind. Frightened, Sarah decided to look into the history of the house. She went to the local library and discovered a horrifying truth. 30 years ago, a man named Robert lived in the house. He was an eccentric, and the villagers were always speculating about his strange behavior. Robert was often seen walking around on his roof at night, as if he were searching for something. One night, he mysteriously disappeared. The villagers said he jumped off the roof and his body was never found. Sarah returned home with a chill. She told John, but he dismissed it. "It's just a rumor. There's nothing to be afraid of." But Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that the footsteps on the roof had something to do with Robert. One night, John decided to stay up all night to keep watch. When the clock struck 3 a.m., the footsteps came again, this time clearer than ever. John grabbed a flashlight and climbed onto the roof. When he shined the light, he saw the silhouette of a man standing at the edge of the roof, his back to him. "Who's there?" John shouted, but the figure didn't answer, just stood there as if looking down. John moved closer, but before he could touch the figure, it disappeared, as if melting into thin air. He felt a cold wind blow by, and when he looked down, the footprints reappeared, this time stretching all the way to Lucas's window. The Millers decided to leave the house the next morning. They never returned, but the footsteps on the roof still haunted their dreams. New neighbors moved in, and the footsteps started again. Are you sure there is nothing unusual about the house you live in? If you hear noises on the roof in the middle of the night, be careful. Maybe something is waiting for you. Story 9. The Man in the Photograph. Adam, 32, is an avid antique collector. He often visits flea markets to find unique and historically valuable items. One day, at a small market in the suburbs, Adam discovered an old oil painting. The painting was quite simple: a middle-aged man with a stern face, wearing a fedora, standing in a dim setting. The man's eyes seemed to stare at Adam, making him feel attracted. "It's a unique painting," said the seller, "but I have to warn you, the previous owners didn't keep it for long." Adam laughed, thinking it was just a ploy to increase the value of the painting. Without hesitation, he bought it for a cheap price and brought it home. Adam hung the painting on the living room wall. At first, everything seemed normal. He even proudly showed off his bargain to his friends. But after only a few days, Adam began to notice something strange. Every morning when he woke up, the painting seemed to be no longer in its original place. It gradually moved, little by little, towards the door. At first, Adam thought he was mistaken. Maybe he had moved the painting and forgotten. But when this happened every day, he began to feel uneasy. One night, he put the painting back on the wall, measured it with a ruler, and took pictures to make sure it hadn't moved. But the next morning, the painting was almost a meter away from its original position, as if someone had intentionally moved it closer to the door. What worried Adam the most were the eyes of the man in the painting. Every time he looked at the painting, the eyes seemed to change. No longer just a blank stare, but became alive, as if watching him. Adam tried turning the painting to the wall to avoid seeing it. But the next morning, the painting was back in its original position, the man's eyes still staring at him. A creepy feeling began to take over. Adam told himself that he was just imagining things, but deep down, he knew that something was wrong with the painting. Adam decided to find out about the painting. He took it to an antiques expert, Mr. Henry. When he saw the painting, Henry was silent for a long time, then said, "This painting is not simply a work of art. I have heard of it. It is the work of a painter named Victor Kane, who lived in the 19th century. He was famous for painting paintings that carried curses. According to Henry, Victor Kane created this painting to haunt the people he hated. He died mysteriously after completing the last work, and from then on, the painting disappeared. Rumor has it that the man in the painting is Victor Kane himself. And if this painting continues to move, you need to be very careful. It is not just a painting, it is a portal to his spirit." Adam returned home, deciding to throw away the painting. But when he tried to carry it out of the house, the painting became so heavy that he could not lift it. He used a box cutter to cut the canvas, but the fabric did not tear. That night, Adam was awakened by a loud noise. He ran into the living room and saw the painting lying on the floor, right in front of the door. But this time, the man in the painting was no longer standing still. His face had changed, his mouth was in a creepy smile, and his hand seemed to be reaching forward, as if to grab Adam. Adam panicked. He decided to burn the painting. But as the fire burned, the room became strangely cold. He heard a hoarse laugh echoing through the air. "You think you can escape me?" The voice echoed from the painting. Adam ran away from home, leaving everything behind. He moved to another city, trying to forget what had happened. But every time he passed an art gallery, he felt as if eyes were watching him. A few months later, a Victor Kane painting appeared at an auction, unknown to Adam. A new buyer excitedly took it home, not knowing that he had brought a nightmare with him. If you see an old painting with eyes that seem to be watching you, think twice before taking it home, because you never know what is waiting for you behind the frame. Story 10. The Whispering Willow. Have you ever heard of strange rumors about a place that people tell you not to go near? A place that seems to contain secrets of time, of things beyond imagination? Today, I will tell you the story of Claire, a young woman caught up in a terrifying rumor about an old willow tree that whispers your name. But what horrifies her most is not that it knows her name, but that the voice it uses is hers. The small village of Green Hollow is a peaceful place, but it is also full of ghost stories that have been passed down through the generations. In the backyard of an abandoned house is an old willow tree. The elders of the village say that this willow tree is unlike any other. They believe that it can whisper your name when you stand in its shadow at dusk. The rumor goes, if the willow tree calls your name, do not answer. If you do, you will never leave its shadow. Claire, 28, is a young reporter looking for unique stories for the local newspaper. When she heard about the willow tree, she didn't believe it. "It's just a silly rumor," Claire laughed and decided to turn the story into her next article. Little did she know that this decision would change her life forever. Claire arrived in the village of Green Hollow on an autumn afternoon. The air was cold, and the old willow leaves were fluttering in the wind. When asked, the locals advised her not to go near the willow tree. "Don't you know," said the old woman selling goods in the village, "anyone who hears the tree calling their name will have a terrible experience." But Claire was not moved. That night, she decided to visit the willow. Claire went to the abandoned house where the old willow stood. The willow tree's shadow stretched out, covering the entire yard. Claire stood in the shade of the tree, turned on the tape recorder, and waited. At first, there was only the sound of the wind rustling through the branches. But after a few minutes, Claire felt something strange. The air around her seemed to have grown colder. The wind stopped blowing, and silence enveloped everything. And then she heard it. Claire. It was her voice, every syllable, every breath. But it came from deep in the darkness, from the willow tree. Claire froze, her heart pounding. She stepped back, but the voice rang out again, louder this time, closer. "Claire, come here." Claire rushed out of the shade of the tree, feeling as if hundreds of eyes were watching her. She ran back to the inn. The tape recorder was still clutched tightly in her hand. That night, she couldn't sleep. Her mind was spinning with questions. The next morning, Claire turned on the tape recorder to listen again. At first, there was only the sound of the wind. But then, her voice rang out. "Claire, I know you're listening. Come back." The tape recorder fell from Claire's hand. She felt like she was being watched, not just by the willow, but by the darkness around her. Claire decided to investigate further. She went to the village library and discovered a creepy story. More than 100 years ago, the old willow tree was planted by a woman named Eleanor, who was accused of witchcraft and hanged right under the tree. According to legend, Eleanor's spirit entered the willow, turning it into a living entity, capable of capturing the souls of those who heard it call their names. The villagers tried to cut the tree down many times, but each time they met with terrible accidents. Despite her fear, Claire decided to return to the willow tree to face the truth. She brought along a tape recorder and a candle. When she arrived, the darkness seemed thicker than before. She stood under the tree, holding the tape recorder firmly in her hand. "Claire," the voice rang out again, clearer than ever. It was not just her voice, but also carried a cold tone, as if hundreds of voices were merging into one. "What do you want?" Claire shouted, but as soon as her words were spoken, a strong wind blew past, extinguishing the candle. The voice replied, "Become a part of me." The darkness seemed alive, wrapping around Claire's legs. She struggled, running away from the tree before the coldness completely enveloped her. Claire left Green Hollow the next morning, carrying with her a lifelong fear. But the whispers never stopped. In the dead of night, when everything was quiet, she still heard her voice echoing. "Claire, that old willow tree is not just a story. If you hear your name called from the darkness, remember, never answer." Story 11. The Endless Corridor. Have you ever felt trapped in a space where every path seems to lead you back to where you started? Imagine you walk down an old hallway, but every time you turn around, it seems longer, darker, and the exit never appears. This is the story of Emma, a young woman, trapped in an endless hallway where time and space have no meaning. Emma, 27, is an office worker working overtime to finish a project. The building where she works is old and almost deserted, with only a few small offices rented. That night, Emma is the last one to leave the office. At 9 p.m., she packs up her documents and prepares to leave. As she walks out into the long hallway leading to the elevator, she notices that everything seems unusually quiet. There was no sound, no footsteps, no air conditioning, just the sound of her high heels echoing in the empty space. Emma pressed the elevator button, but the indicator light didn't come on. Maybe the elevator's broken, she thought, and decided to look for the stairs. But as she turned around to find the stairs, she noticed something strange. The hallway behind her seemed longer. Emma walked quickly down the hallway, thinking she'd made a mistake. But every time she turned around, the hallway seemed longer, with lights flickering in the distance. She began to feel uneasy. The doors on either side of the hallway were closed, with nameplates faded by time. She knocked on a few doors, hoping to find someone, but there was no answer. "I just need to go faster," she told herself. But no matter how far she walked, the hallway seemed to stretch on forever. Every time she looked back, the starting point seemed farther away. After nearly 30 minutes of walking, Emma began to notice something was wrong. The hallway lights not only flickered, but faded behind her, as if the darkness were chasing her. She felt something was wrong, a feeling like someone was watching her from the shadows. Emma turned, but saw nothing but an endless void. She walked faster, clutching her bag, but the sound of her shoes no longer echoed in unison, as if another pair of feet were following her. "Is anyone there?" Emma shouted, her voice echoing down the hallway. But only silence answered her. Emma realized she was going in circles. The hallway not only lengthened, but changed. Doors next to her began to have signs she didn't recognize. One door had her name on it, Emma Carter, room 207. But when she tried to open it, it was locked. She walked on, and then another door appeared. This time, the sign said, "Don't come back." Emma shivered. She tried the door, but there was nothing inside, just a pitch-black void. Suddenly, from afar, she heard whispering. The voice was vague, unclear, but it seemed to be calling her name. Emma shouted, "Someone help me!" But the voice that answered only repeated her words, as if it were imitating her. Emma began to panic. She ran down the hallway, but she couldn't escape. She didn't even feel like she was moving. Everything was exactly as she had started. She tried calling her phone, but there was no signal. The whispering grew louder, closer, and now it seemed to come from everywhere. Emma, "Stay here," the voice echoed, as if hundreds of people were speaking at once. She covered her ears, tears streaming down her face, trying to run away from the terrifying sound. Emma found a large door at the end of the hallway, different from the others. On the door, there was a line of words engraved, "Your choice." She opened the door and walked into an empty room, with a small table in the middle. On the table was a piece of paper and a pen. The paper said, "Sign to escape or stay forever." Emma didn't know what to do. She was afraid that if she signed, she would be stuck here forever. But if she didn't sign, would she ever escape? In a moment of hesitation, the lights in the room began to dim, and the voice rang out again, "Emma, stay, forever." Emma decided to sign, her hands shaking as she wrote each letter. As soon as she put down the pen, the room disappeared, and she found herself standing in front of the entrance of the office building, the clock showing 11 p.m. She thought she had escaped, but things were not the same. When she returned home, the people around her seemed to not recognize her. Her phone had no signal, and all her social media posts were gone. She realized she had escaped the hallway, but not the world she knew. She was in another place, where everything was just a shadow of reality. Are you sure where you are is reality? If you walk down a hallway that seems to go on forever, be careful. Sometimes the only way out is the path that leads you to a place you never wanted to go. Story 12. The Phone from the Past. Ryan, 32, is an avid collector of antiques. One weekend morning, he visited a flea market looking for a unique item. In a hidden corner, he saw a vintage rotary phone, its wooden case and numbers faded with time. The salesman, an old man with a wrinkled face, smiled when he saw Ryan's interest. "You have an eye. This phone is different from the others. But I must warn you, it brings more trouble than joy." Ryan laughed, thinking that it was just the salesperson's way of increasing the value of the item. He bought it cheap and took it home, not knowing that he had just opened a door to the unimaginable. That evening, Ryan placed the phone on his desk. Out of curiosity, he tried picking it up. There was no signal, just a soft buzzing sound. He tried dialing a random number, but nothing happened. Then a strange thought occurred to him. What if this phone could connect to the past? Ryan laughed at his own absurdity, but tried dialing anyway. He dialed his own number, a number he had used many years ago. The other end of the line rang. Ryan was startled. It couldn't be. It was just a coincidence, right? But when the ringing stopped, a voice spoke up, his own voice, but younger. "Hello." Ryan froze. It was indeed his voice, from 10 years ago. He stammered, "Ryan, it's me from the future." But before he could say anything else, the other end of the line hung up. Ryan couldn't believe what had just happened. He tried again, this time dialing and waiting longer. When the familiar voice came through, he carefully explained, "Look, I know this is crazy, but it's you, from the future. I just want to warn you." Before he could finish, the voice on the other end of the line yelled, cutting him off, "Don't do it. Don't ever call again. It'll only get worse." Ryan jumped, dropping the receiver. His heart was pounding. He sat there, trying to make sense of the warning. What did "don't do it" mean? What would happen if he continued? The next morning, Ryan woke up with a feeling of unease. When he walked into his office, the phone was no longer in its original place. Instead, it was placed on the floor, as if someone had moved it during the night. He picked up the receiver, and this time, without dialing, it started ringing. Ryan hesitated, but then picked up. It was no longer his familiar voice on the other end, but a low, cold voice. "Ryan, you broke the rules. There's no going back now." Ryan panicked, hung up the phone, and tried to disconnect it, but all his efforts were in vain. He felt as if the phone was glued to this space, unable to be removed. Over the next few days, memories that Ryan thought he had forgotten began to surface. Past mistakes, moments he wished he could change, they all seemed to come alive in his mind. The phone began to ring at random times, and every time he picked it up, a voice from his past would ring. Lost friends, broken relationships, and himself, all blaming him for his mistakes. Once, when he picked up the phone, Ryan heard the voice of his mother, who had passed away many years ago. "Why didn't you save her? You had a chance." Ryan collapsed, tears streaming down his face, unsure whether what he heard was real or just a hallucination. Ryan decided to end it all. He believed that if he could reconnect with his past self, he could right his wrongs and escape the curse of the phone. He picked up the phone, dialed one last time, and waited. The voice of his past self came from the other end of the line. "I warned you. Don't do it." Ryan shouted, "I have no choice. If you hear this, don't buy the phone. Don't take it home." But the voice on the other end replied, colder than ever, "Don't you understand? You're the one who brought it home. There's no way out." The phone never stopped ringing. Ryan lost the sense of what was real and what was imaginary. He gave up everything, left home, but no matter where he went, the phone appeared, on his desk, in the living room, even in the back seat of his car. Every time he picked it up, he heard his own voice, pleading, warning, and blaming. Ryan realized that he was trapped in an inescapable loop where past and future merged, and the phone was the nightmarish link. That old phone you found may be more than just an antique. If you hear the ringing and the voice from the past calling your name, remember, not every question needs an answer, and not every call should be answered. Story 13. The Shadow That Won't Disappear. I'll tell you a story. A story so strange that it's hard to believe it happened. But I swear, every word I say here is true. It all started on a normal day at house number 23 on Willow Street, a small town in the suburbs. Sarah and Jack, a young couple who had just moved here, loved their new house. It had a large living room, a small garden, and especially an antique fireplace that gave off a cozy feeling. But from the moment Sarah moved in, she felt something was wrong. First, there was a shadow. It was on the wall right next to the fireplace, looking like the shape of a person kneeling. At first, Jack just laughed and said, "It's probably just the light, don't think too much." But no. No matter how the light changed, the shadow was still there. Sarah noticed the shadow that afternoon when she was cleaning the living room. The light from the window was very bright, but the shadow did not change. It seemed to be carved into the wall. She sat down and stared at the shadow, trying to figure out what was unusual. But other than the figure of a kneeling person, she did not discover anything else. That night, she told Jack about it. Jack, who was always practical, took out a flashlight to check. He shone the light from many angles, trying to cover the light from the window, but the shadow did not disappear. Jack frowned. That's strange. Maybe this wall was burned, or there is some stain. I'll repaint it tomorrow. The next morning, Jack eagerly bought a can of white paint. He spent the whole morning repainting the wall, making sure everything was perfect. Sarah breathed a sigh of relief, thinking that everything would finally be over. But when the two of them returned to the living room that night, the shadow was still there. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "No way!" Jack shouted. He checked the paint, but it was clear that it couldn't cover the shadow. From then on, anxiety began to creep into their minds. Sarah began to have strange dreams. She dreamed of a woman in a white dress, kneeling at the feet of a man in a black suit. The woman was sobbing, her hands shaking as if begging for something. But the man didn't say a word, just standing there, looking down at her coldly. When Sarah woke up, she always felt tired and exhausted. The dreams kept repeating, each time clearer. One night, while they were both sleeping soundly, Sarah suddenly woke up. She heard a strange sound, like a whisper. It came from the living room. "Jack, do you hear something?" she whispered, waking her husband. Jack sat up, trying to listen. Sure enough, there was a faint sound, like someone talking, but the words were indistinct. The two tiptoed down to the living room. But when the lights were turned on, everything was quiet. The shadow was still there, silently watching them. Frightened, Sarah decided to find out the history of the house. She went to the local library and met Mrs. Mary, an elderly librarian. When Sarah mentioned number 23, Mary's face paled. "Are you there?" she asked, her voice filled with worry. Mrs. Mary said that more than 50 years ago, the house had belonged to a young couple, Emily and Charles. Charles was a powerful and wealthy man, but he had a cruel temper. It was rumored that, during a fight one night, Charles forced Emily to her knees and begged for forgiveness. But instead of forgiving her, he murdered her. Emily disappeared, and Charles left town not long after. Emily's body was never found. After hearing the story, Sarah felt like she was in a spiral with no way out. She told Jack everything. "What do you think if we leave?" she suggested. But Jack, though scared, did not want to leave the house they had worked so hard to build. "We can't let an old story rule our lives," he said. But things got worse. The whispers became clearer, the shadows seemed to move. One night, Sarah even saw the shape of a woman, blurry but distinct, kneeling in front of the fireplace. With no other choice, Sarah sought out a priest. Father Thomas, a man experienced in such matters, agreed to help. He came to the house and performed an exorcism. As the exorcism progressed, the house shook as if there was a small earthquake. The shadow on the wall gradually faded, then disappeared completely. Sarah collapsed, tears streaming down her face, feeling like a nightmare had passed. Jack hugged her. Both of them promised each other that they would never mention this again. But you know what? Even though the shadow had disappeared, every time Sarah passed that wall, she still felt like someone was watching her. "So, do you dare to stay in that house?" The strange letter. It was a normal morning, like any other. I had just finished my morning coffee and quietly checked my mailbox. Among the pile of boring mail, a handwritten letter stood out with a black envelope, the address written in familiar handwriting. My heart suddenly tightened when I read the sender's name, Michael Carter. Michael was my best friend. We used to be a perfect pair, doing everything together. But Michael passed away 10 years ago in a terrible car accident. I still remember clearly the day I stood at his grave, my heart filled with pain and regret. How could this be? My hands trembled as I opened the envelope. Inside was a black invitation, handwritten. "Dear Nathan, it's been a long time. I'd love to have you at my party on October 31st at 7 Elm Street. Please don't say no. You have no idea how happy I am for you. Sincerely, Michael." I was stunned. This was definitely a prank. Someone must know about Michael and was playing a trick on me. But the strangest part was the handwriting. It was exactly like Michael's. I tried to put the thought out of my mind and go about my day. But no matter what I did, the image of the invitation haunted my mind. I took it to Rachel, my coworker and other close friend. "Someone must be playing a prank on you," she said, but her face couldn't hide her concern. "But if you want to be sure, why not come and see? If nothing happens, at least you can figure it out for yourself." The idea sounded crazy, but part of me wanted to know the truth. October 31st came sooner than I thought. I was wearing a black suit, feeling uncomfortable in my own skin. As I drove up to 7 Elm, I couldn't deny that a sense of unease had taken hold of me. The mansion came into view, an old building with dim yellow lights pouring out of the windows. Something was wrong. The house had an eerie atmosphere, as if it were stuck in another time. I stepped onto the steps, touched the heavy wooden door, and knocked lightly. The door opened immediately, as if someone had been waiting. I stepped inside, feeling like I had stepped into another world. The room was lavishly decorated, with crystal chandeliers and long tables covered in white tablecloths. Soft music played from an antique record player. But what caught my attention most were the guests. They were dressed smartly, but there was something off. Their skin was pale, their eyes were empty, and they moved strangely, as if they were gliding rather than walking. I tried to keep my composure, telling myself that I was imagining things. But then, a familiar voice rang out behind me. "Nathan, you're here." I turned. It was Michael. Michael looked the same as the last time I'd seen him, as if time had stood still for him. He smiled, his eyes as bright as ever. "Michael, is that really you?" I asked, my voice cracking. "Of course," he replied, patting my shoulder as if nothing had happened. "You have no idea how much I've missed you." I couldn't believe my eyes. How could he be standing here, talking to me, after all these years? The party was even stranger than I had imagined. All the guests knew my name, even though I didn't know them. They talked about things that only Michael and I knew. And then, when I tried to ask Michael what was going on, he just smiled and said, "You'll understand, Nathan. This night is for you." But the truth began to sink in when I realized one thing. All the guests in this room, I had seen them in obituaries. They were all dead. I panicked, trying to find a way out. But the door I had entered at first was now gone. The walls seemed to close, and the room grew dark. Michael moved closer to me, his face no longer as warm as before. "Nathan, you shouldn't leave. This night is for you, and you're never leaving," I screamed, using all my strength to push him away, and lunged for the window. Somehow, I managed to break through a pane of glass and jumped out, landing hard on the cold ground. I woke up in the hospital, with Rachel by my side. She told me that I had been found unconscious next to an abandoned house. There had been no party, and that 7 Elm Street had been abandoned for years. But I knew what I saw was real, and the invitation, though burned, was still in my pocket as a reminder. From that day on, I never accepted an invitation from anyone, whether they were alive or dead. If you received such a strange invitation, would you dare to open it? Story 15. The TV's Greetings. I've always believed that old objects carry a story, a past. But I never thought that an old TV could become the center of my life's nightmare. The story I'm about to tell you is not only a strange series of events, but also a reminder that sometimes the past can come back to haunt us in the most terrifying ways. It all started on a normal Saturday. I'm Ethan, 32 years old, and I just moved into a small apartment in a quiet neighborhood. There's nothing special about the apartment, except that it comes with a few old things from the previous owner. Among them, there's an old Zenith TV, sitting proudly in the corner of the living room. The TV is a 1970s model, with a glossy wooden case, a channel knob, and a convex screen. I didn't intend to keep it, but since I didn't have the money to buy a new TV, I decided to use it for now. Looking at it, I couldn't help but feel a little curious. How could such an old TV work in the modern age? But then I quickly forgot about it and continued with the task of cleaning the new apartment. On the first night in the new apartment, I sat on the sofa, watching a horror movie on my laptop. When the clock pointed to 12 midnight, a strange sound rang out, like the pop of an old electronic device. I looked up in surprise. The screen flickered, then stopped at a creepy clear image. It was me. Yes, on the screen was a scene of me sitting on the sofa, with the laptop on my lap. exactly like I was doing at that moment. I looked around the room, trying to find any hidden cameras in the house, but saw nothing. It must be a strange signal, I told myself, trying to calm myself down. I walked over and turned off the TV, but the feeling of anxiety still lingered. The second night, the incident repeated itself. At exactly 12 midnight, the TV turned on by itself. This time, the image on the screen was me lying on the sofa, completely unaware. With a chill down my spine, I turned the TV off immediately and decided to unplug it. I figured that if it didn't have power, it wouldn't turn on. But on the third night, as I was dozing off on the couch, the poof sound came again. The TV turned on, even though the plug had been pulled out the night before. On the screen, I saw myself. But this time, I wasn't alone. Behind me, in the dark corner of the room, was a faint figure. I couldn't take it anymore. The next morning, I decided to take the TV to a second-hand store to sell it. The shop owner, a gaunt old man with a mischievous glint in his eye, looked at the TV and shook his head. "Are you sure you want to sell it?" he asked, his voice full of meaning. "Of course," I replied, trying to stay calm. The old man looked at me for a moment, then said, "This TV used to belong to a family living in the suburbs. Rumor has it that the previous owner was murdered in front of this screen. Since then, no one has dared to keep it for long. It carries the shadow of what happened." I couldn't believe my ears. "Are you telling the truth? Believe it or not. But I advise you not to leave it in the house another night." I returned home, my mind in turmoil. Although I was very scared, I decided to check it out for myself. I placed the TV in the middle of the living room, readying my phone to record the whole thing. That night, at exactly 12 midnight, the TV turned on. On the screen, an image of me sitting and filming appeared. But then, the scene began to change. I saw myself from the perspective of someone. Someone was standing behind me, slowly approaching. I turned around, but there was no one. The whispers began to ring out, small but clear. "Get out of here." I had no time to think. I immediately gathered my things and left the apartment into the night. When I turned back, I saw the light from the TV still shining through the window, like a haunting greeting. Since then, I have never dared to return to that apartment. I don't know where the TV went, or what it will do to its new owner. But one thing is for sure, if you see a strange old TV, it's best to stay away from it. What about you? Would you dare keep such a TV in your house? Story 16. The Haunted Ring Box. I'm going to tell you the story of a woman named Emily. A story so strange and scary that you will never look at old things in the same way again. Emily is an antique lover. She has a passion for hunting for unique items from second-hand stores, fairs, and small auctions in town. But she never expected that an accidental shopping trip would drag her into a series of bizarre events that she would never forget. It was a Saturday morning. Emily was wandering through a small flea market in the suburbs. She passed by a simple stall with a few old items displayed on a wooden table. Immediately, her eyes were drawn to a small box, made of dark wood, carved with intricate patterns. "How much is this box?" Emily asked the seller, an old woman with gray hair and tired eyes. $20, she replied, her voice low and slow. Emily picked up the box, feeling it was heavier than it should have been. Opening the lid, she found a simple but intricately carved silver ring inside, with a pale green stone in the center. "Is this ring in that price range?" she asked, a little excited and curious. The old woman looked at Emily for a long moment before nodding. "But be careful," she whispered. Emily ignored the warning. She paid, then left with her new item in hand. Later that evening, sitting in her small apartment, Emily took the box out to examine it more closely. The light from the desk lamp illuminated the polished wood of the box, highlighting the carvings. She opened the lid. Immediately, a strange sound rang out. It was a sobbing sound, very small, as if coming from somewhere far away. Emily, startled, closed the lid of the box. "I must be imagining it," she reassured herself. But curiosity urged her to open it again. This time, the crying was clearer, as if it was coming from within the room. The female voice, soft but full of sadness, seemed to carry an indescribable pain. Emily felt a chill run down her spine. She quickly closed the lid of the box, put it on the table, and stepped back. From that day on, everything began to change. Every time Emily opened the box, the crying would resound. But not only that, sometimes she would feel something cold touching her hand when touching the ring. At first, she tried to ignore it. But the sounds did not stop at the box. At night, when she was sleeping, Emily began to hear the crying echoing in the room. It grew louder, more painful, as if begging for help. Emily couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the image of a woman in a white dress, standing in the corner of the room, her face streaked with tears. Frightened, Emily decided to find out the origin of the box and the ring. She returned to the market, but the old woman's stall was gone. Not giving up, Emily took the box to an antique shop in the city. The shop owner, a middle-aged man named Robert, immediately recognized the box. "This is a very special item," he said, his eyes filled with worry. "It is rumored to have belonged to a woman named Eleanor, who lived in the 19th century. She was murdered by her husband on suspicion of adultery. This ring was the last thing she wore before she died. It is said that Eleanor's spirit never left this ring." Emily shivered. "So what do I have to do to get rid of it?" Robert shook his head. "Maybe she wants to tell you something. You need to find a way to free her." That night, Emily decided to open the box again. She placed the box on the table, lit a candle, and closed her eyes, trying to concentrate. "Tell me, what do you want me to do?" Emily whispered. The ring inside the box began to vibrate slightly, and the crying turned into whispers. Eleanor's voice rang out, weak but clear. "Find where I was buried. Free me." Emily knew what she had to do. After many days of searching, Emily finally found Eleanor's old house, now a wasteland. She took the box with her and began to dig. When the pick and shovel hit something hard, Emily discovered a small metal box. Inside was a yellowed piece of paper with the scrawled words, "Forgive me." Just then, a cold wind blew by. Emily felt a strange sense of relief, as if an invisible burden had been lifted from her shoulders. From that day on, the crying stopped. The ring and the box were now just ordinary objects, no longer carrying the darkness. But Emily knew that this encounter had changed her forever. She understood that there were things that could not be explained by logic, and that sometimes a small action could bring relief to even lost souls. What about you? If you heard a crying sound coming from an object, would you have the courage to open it? Story 17. Eyes in the Dark. Have you ever felt like someone was staring at you in the dark, even though you knew you were alone? The story I am about to tell happens to Claire, a 27-year-old woman who lives alone in a small apartment in the city center. Claire has always been a strong, practical person and not easily intimidated. But one fateful night, everything changed completely. That evening, Claire returned home after a long day of work. She plopped herself down on the soft sofa, opened a bottle of wine, and turned on a romantic comedy to relax. But somehow, there was something in the air that made her feel uncomfortable. Her small apartment usually felt cozy, but tonight it seemed too quiet. The background music from the movie seemed to be drowned out by the strange silence that filled the room. Claire convinced herself that it was just fatigue and decided to go to bed early. The clock read 3:12 a.m. when Claire suddenly woke up. There was no sound to wake her, but she felt like something was wrong. As her eyes adjusted to the darkness, Claire noticed something strange. Two small, red dots of light hovering at the end of the bedroom. They looked like eyes, but they weren't blinking, just standing still, staring at her. Her heart was pounding, a rush of adrenaline rushing through her body. "I'm just dreaming," she told herself, trying not to let the fear take over. She reached out and flipped on the bedside lamp. The bedroom was instantly filled with warm light, but the red eyes were gone. Claire sat up, looking around the room. There was nothing there. Just the familiar objects, the dresser, the desk, and the armchair by the window. She shook her head, laughing at herself for imagining something stupid. But the strange feeling didn't go away. Even though the light had dispelled the darkness, Claire still felt like someone was watching her. She couldn't explain it, but every time she turned her head, the feeling became more obvious. The next night, Claire decided to go to bed early. She put a chair in front of her bedroom door, which somehow made her feel a little more secure. But in the middle of the night, she woke up again. This time, it wasn't because her eyes were red, but because of a strange sound. It was a knock. Soft but clear, like someone was tapping on her bedroom window. Claire froze. Her apartment was on the 5th floor, there was no balcony, and her window couldn't be opened from the outside. She reached for her phone, intending to turn on the flashlight to check, but the knocking suddenly stopped. She lay still in the dark, her heart pounding, waiting for any other sign. But nothing happened. The next morning, Claire decided to ask her next-door neighbor. Lucas, a man in his 30s, had lived there longer than she had. "That's strange," Lucas said when Claire told him the story. The previous tenant also talked about red eyes and a feeling of being watched. She moved out after only 3 months. "Do you know why?" Claire asked, trying to stay calm. Lucas shook his head. She didn't say anything, just that she couldn't take it anymore. Claire couldn't ignore Lucas's story. She decided to find out more about her apartment. Through some old documents at the city library, Claire discovered that the building had been a small hotel in the 1950s. A terrible event had happened in the room she was staying in. A man was suspected of murdering his wife and then committing suicide. It was said that his spirit still haunted the room, watching over the people who lived there. That night, Claire decided to do something she had never thought of doing: face her fear. She sat on her bed, the room dark, the only light coming from the nightlight. "What do you want from me?" Claire said, her voice trembling. There was no response, but a chill filled the room. Suddenly, the red eyes appeared again, closer than ever. "Get out of here," a deep voice said, cold and menacing. Claire didn't need to hear it a second time. She stormed out of the room, leaving the apartment without a backward glance. Claire moved out the next morning. She never returned to that apartment, and never told anyone about it except Lucas. Sometimes, in her dreams, Claire still sees those red eyes, watching her from the darkness. What about you? Do you ever feel like you're being watched, even when no one is there? If so, be careful. Eyes in the dark could be waiting for you. Story 18. The Voice from the Hill. There are stories that have been passed down through the generations, stories that are so strange that they are hard to believe, but too true to be forgotten. In a small village in the English countryside, there is a legend about Shadow Hill, where every full moon night, the villagers hear a singing voice echoing in the dark. The story I am about to tell you is about Liam, a curious young man who decided to go up that hill to find the truth. But he never returned. Shadow Hill is less than an hour's walk from the village. It is not big, just a bare hill with a few old trees scattered around and an inexplicable cold atmosphere. During the day, the hill looks completely normal. But on full moon nights, everything changes. The villagers say that when the moon rises, a strange singing voice will echo from the top of the hill. The voice was not human, but something else, both alluring and terrifying. No one dared to approach the hill on such nights. But Liam, with his unbridled curiosity, decided to explore this mystery. Liam was a young man, always fascinated by the occult. When he heard about the singing from Shadow Hill, he could not resist the urge to find out the truth. "It's probably just a joke," he told his friend, Emily, when she tried to stop him. "Don't go, Liam. Too many people have never returned from that hill," Emily warned, her voice full of worry. But Liam only smiled. "If I don't come back, at least I'll leave a good story." Emily didn't smile. She felt that something was wrong, but Liam had made up his mind. That night, the moon was full and bright, casting a silvery light over the entire village. Liam prepared a flashlight, a small knife, and a notebook to write everything down. He left the house when the clock struck 11 p.m. When he reached the bottom of the hill, Liam felt an eerie silence. No insects, no wind, just a dead silence. He began to climb. The singing began. As Liam neared the top of the hill, the singing began. It was a female voice, clear but full of sadness. The melody was unlike any song Liam had ever heard. It seemed to touch his soul, making him want to run away and move closer at the same time. Liam turned on the flashlight, but the light only made the space around him more terrifying. The trees seemed to twist in the darkness, and every step he took felt like someone was watching him. Finally, Liam reached the top of the hill. He saw a woman standing in the moonlight. She wore a long white dress, her long black hair reaching the ground. Her face was unclear, as if covered by a layer of mist. She didn't look at Liam, just continued singing. "Is it you?" Liam called, trying not to let his voice tremble. The woman stopped singing and turned around. But when Liam looked into her eyes, he felt as if his whole body froze. Her eyes weren't human eyes, but two dark pits, as if they could suck him in. The last thing people heard. In the village below, people heard Liam scream, echoing in the night. It wasn't a scream of normal fear, but a scream of extreme pain, as if his soul was being torn apart. The singing on the hill suddenly stopped. The next day, Emily and a few villagers climbed the hill to look for Liam. But there was no trace of him. No shoes, no flashlight, and no notebook. The only thing they found was a scorched circle on the ground, as if something very hot had once stood there. Liam's story became a warning to the villagers. No one dared to go up the hill on a full moon night, and the mysterious singing continued to ring out like a deadly invitation. What about you? If you heard that singing, would you dare to approach to find out the truth? Sometimes, mysteries should be left alone, because the truth may be something you never wanted to know. Story 19. Imaginary Friends. There are things that children see that adults cannot understand. Sometimes it is innocent imagination, but sometimes it is something else. What I am about to tell is the story of Sarah, a young mother who lives with her son, Noah, in a small house in the suburbs. This story begins with an imaginary friend, but ends with a nightmare that no one could have expected. Noah is a 6-year-old boy, smart but quite quiet. Since moving to the new house, he has started talking about an imaginary friend. "Mommy, I have a new friend," Noah said to Sarah while she was preparing dinner. Sarah smiled, not thinking much about it. "What's his name?" Noah looked up, his eyes sparkling with interest. "His name is Ben. But he doesn't like to talk much, Mom. He just stands there." Stand where? Sarah asked, feeling a little strange. Noah pointed to the corner of the living room, where the old armchair Sarah had brought from their old house stood. He's always standing there, but he doesn't like to turn around. Sarah paused, feeling a chill run down her spine. At first, Sarah thought Ben was just a figment of Noah's wild imagination. But then, strange things started to happen. One evening, while Sarah was cleaning up after dinner, she heard Noah whispering in the living room. She walked in and found him sitting on the sofa, staring into the corner. "Noah, who are you talking to?" "With Ben," Noah replied, not taking his eyes off the corner. "What did Ben say to you?" "He told me not to tell Mom he was here." Sarah felt cold, but tried to keep her composure. "Did Ben say anything else?" Noah shook his head. "No. He just stood there. But Mom, he never left." From that day on, Sarah began to pay more attention to Noah's behavior. He often sat quietly in the living room, his eyes glued to the corner of the room. Even though Sarah turned on all the lights, that corner always felt darker, deeper than the rest of the room. One night, Sarah decided to move the armchair to another place, hoping that this would make Noah forget about Ben. But as soon as she lifted the chair, a strange sound rang out. It was a soft, cold laugh, as if from afar. Sarah froze, looking around but seeing no one. "Noah, do you hear anything?" she asked. Noah shook his head, but his eyes seemed to be staring at something Sarah couldn't see. Sarah began to have strange dreams. In her dreams, she found herself standing in the living room, but there was no light. The room was dark, except for the corner where Ben usually stood. In the darkness, there was a figure. It was a tall, thin man with messy hair and empty black eyes. He stood with his back turned, just as Noah had described. But even though he didn't turn, Sarah could feel him looking at her, deep and menacing. She woke up in a sweat, her heart pounding. One night, while Sarah was sleeping, she was suddenly awakened by a low laugh in Noah's room. She jumped up and ran to her son's room. When she opened the door, she found Noah sitting on the bed, eyes wide, staring toward the corner. "Noah, what are you doing?" she asked, her voice trembling. "He's here," Noah said, pointing to the corner. Sarah followed her son's hand, but saw nothing but darkness. "He's looking at me now," Noah added, his voice no longer as innocent as before. Terrified, Sarah decided to investigate the house. She went to the local library and found that the house had once belonged to a man named Benjamin Harper. He had been accused of murdering his young wife before committing suicide in the living room. Benjamin Harper. Ben. Sarah felt her heart sink. She understood that Ben was not just a figure in Noah's imagination. Sarah decided to ask for help from a priest in the village. The priest, Father Marcus, came to her house and performed an exorcism. As the exorcism began, the house shook, the doors slammed shut, and a growling sound came from the corner of the living room. Noah began to cry, but Father Marcus did not stop. He recited a prayer, and the darkness in the corner of the room seemed to disappear, giving way to light. After the ceremony, Noah no longer mentioned Ben. The corner of the living room no longer felt as cold as before. Sarah and Noah moved away soon after, never to return to their old house. But sometimes, Sarah still feels like there is a gaze watching her from the shadows. What about you? If one day your child told you that he or she had an imaginary friend, would you believe it was just a child's imagination? Or would you look more closely at the darkness around you? Story 20. The Empty Chair. There are objects in the house that seem to be merely decorative or useful, but sometimes they carry mysterious stories that we cannot understand. This is the story of the Carter family, a story that begins with an old rocking chair in the living room but ends with a mystery that forces them to leave the house forever. The Carter family, including Anna, Tom, and their young daughter Lily, have just moved into an old house on the outskirts of the city. They love the peace and rustic beauty of this place. One day, while walking around a flea market, Anna sees a wooden rocking chair, intricately carved. The chair is classic in style, with a brown paint that has faded over time. This chair will fit perfectly in the living room, Anna tells Tom. The salesman, an old man with deep eyes, looks at Anna for a long time before smiling faintly. "It's a special piece," he said, his voice low and meaningful. Tom laughed. "It's just an old chair. We bought it." The old man shrugged, took the money, and said nothing more. The not empty chair. The rocking chair quickly became the centerpiece of the Carter living room. Lily was especially fond of it. She often sat there, reading or playing with her dolls. But soon, strange things began to happen. At first, Anna noticed that every morning when she woke up, the chair was not in the exact spot where she had put it the night before. She thought Lily had been naughty and forgotten to put it back. "Did you play with the rocking chair last night, Lily?" Anna asked. Lily shook her head. "No, Mom. But I saw it rocking by itself." Anna just laughed, thinking her daughter was imagining things. But then, one night, she and Tom both heard a creaking sound coming from the living room. That night, Anna woke up around midnight. She heard a strange noise, like wood rubbing together. She shook Tom awake. "Do you hear something?" she whispered. Tom listened hard, and then he heard it. It was a rhythmic rocking sound, accompanied by the creaking of the wooden chair. "It must be the wind," Tom said, but he didn't sound convinced. Anna and Tom walked down to the living room. When they turned on the light, the rocking chair was still rocking, very slowly, as if someone had just stood up. Tom walked over and stopped the chair. He looked around the room, but saw nothing unusual. "It's just the uneven wood floor," he said, trying to reassure them both. But Anna wasn't convinced. Over the next few days, Lily began to act strangely. The little girl would sit in the rocking chair for hours, whispering to someone her parents couldn't see. "Who are you talking to, Lily?" Anna asked, her voice worried. "With my uncle," Lily replied, her eyes clear. "Which uncle?" "My uncle sat in the rocking chair with me. He said this used to be his house." A chill ran down Anna's spine. Frightened, Anna decided to find out more about the chair's origins. She returned to the flea market, but the old man selling the chair stall was gone. Not giving up, she went to the local library and made a horrifying discovery. The house they were staying in had belonged to a man named Charles Miller, who lived in the 1940s. Charles was known to be a loner and would often sit in his rocking chair, watching the world outside through the window. But one day, he was found dead in that chair. It was said that his spirit never left the chair. Anna told Tom everything, and the two decided to get rid of the chair. But the night before they could do so, things took a turn for the worse. The rocking noise grew louder, as if someone was sitting on the chair, moving it around angrily. The window in the living room opened by itself, and a cold wind blew in. Anna and Tom ran down to the living room. They saw the rocking chair swaying violently, and Lily standing next to it, her eyes wide open, unblinking. "Lily, come here," Anna shouted. But Lily only said, "Uncle doesn't want to go. He wants us to stay here forever." Unable to bear it any longer, Anna and Tom immediately left the house that night. They took Lily with them, leaving all their belongings, including the rocking chair. The next morning, they returned to get their things and found that the chair was gone. No one knows where it went. The Carters never returned to that house. But sometimes, in her dreams, Anna still hears the creaking of the rocking chair, as if it were calling her back. What about you? Would you dare sit in a rocking chair if you weren't sure it was actually empty?